Reputation refers to the collective beliefs, evaluations, and impressions about an individual's character that develop within a group or social network. Studies of people at work find that they quickly develop reputations for being good citizens, cooperators, or bad apples, defectors, and that these reputations spread through the organization and persist over time. 2013. Very often, when you interact with someone, say in a dorm or at work, you're likely to know a bit about that person's reputation. Does such knowledge influence levels of cooperation? To answer this question, some researchers have added a twist to the prisoner's dilemma game. Prior to playing, participants are told about their partner's reputation of being someone who cooperates or defects. As you'd expect, participants will readily cooperate and give resources to an interaction partner who has a reputation for cooperation, but they'll defect and choose not to give resources to an interaction partner known to be greedy. 2000. These findings raise an intriguing question. How do we come to know each other's reputation? One idea is that reputations spread through gossiping, something most people are reluctant to admit to doing, but often enjoy when they do. Gossip can be defined as a communicative act in which one person comments on the reputation of another who is not present. 2012. One of the primary reasons we gossip is to figure out the reputations of other people. Through gossip, we investigate whether other group members are inclined to act in ways that strengthen the group. For example, by being civil, fair, and cooperative, or in ways that might create friction and ill will. This analysis yields what might seem like a counterintuitive prediction, that groups in which gossip takes place might actually be more cooperative, and indeed, that's what Matthew Feinberg and his colleagues have found. In their study, participants played an economic game in which they could give some money to other people in their group. 2014. In one condition, they were allowed to gossip about each other's generosity or lack thereof. In a second condition, no such opportunity to gossip was afforded. Over the course of several iterations, the groups whose members could gossip became more cooperative than the groups who weren't allowed to gossip. The threat of gossip makes people aware of what might happen to their reputations should they choose to act selfishly, thus encouraging more cooperative behavior. Reputation, the collective beliefs, evaluations, and impressions people hold about an individual within a social network. It takes many good deeds to build a good reputation, and only one bad deed to lose it. Benjamin Franklin. Construal processes and cooperation. The way we construe events and situations matters a great deal in shaping interactions toward more cooperative or more competitive outcomes. In particular, the way we explicitly label situations could influence levels of competition and cooperation. If we think of international crises as build-ups to war, diplomatic solutions may become less likely. When lawyers treat divorce settlements as adversarial and as opportunities to get their client the best outcome at the expense of the estranged spouse, entrenched bitterness seems inevitable. In a striking demonstration of the power of labels, Lieberman, Samuels, and Ross, 2002, conducted a study in which they labeled the prisoner's dilemma game in one of two ways. Half the participants were told they were going to play the Wall Street game, and the other half were told it was the community game. Everything else about the experiment was the same for the two groups. What might seem to be a trivial change in labels had a dramatic effect on the participants' behavior. Those playing the community game cooperated on the opening round twice as often as those playing the Wall Street game. Moreover, these initial differences were maintained throughout the subsequent rounds of the experiment. The Wall Street label doubtless made the participants adopt a perspective that made maximizing their own profits paramount. In contrast, the community label conjured up a different set of images and motives that increased the appeal of maximizing the participants' joint outcomes. Box 14.5, Not So Fast, Critical Thinking about Generalizing to the Real World, which is external validity. Much of our discussion about cooperation thus far has come from studies using the prisoner's dilemma and related games, such as the dictator game, collectively known as economic games. Their structure captures a basic tension between cooperating and defecting in relationships of many kinds, from negotiations between adversarial nations to the daily lives of romantic partners. If you're skeptical about the external validity of these games, that is, the extent to which they generalize to cooperative behavior outside the lab, you're not alone. Critics describe three kinds of doubts about the external validity of economic games, 2007. First are the stakes involved. People are given money for cooperating or defecting, or they give away money that's been given to them in an experiment. People are dealing with play money and not actual money they've earned, which raises the question of whether we would observe similar patterns of cooperation when the money is real, earned, and costly to sacrifice. Second, critics suggest that being in a laboratory makes norms of cooperative behavior more salient. Simply signing up for an experiment, getting there on time, and following instructions from an experimenter are all acts guided by norms of cooperation, again suggesting that patterns of cooperation observed in the lab may diverge from those out in the real world. Third, in lab studies, people are acutely aware of being scrutinized, and scrutiny strengthens the likelihood of cooperative behavior. The best response to concerns about the external validity of a paradigm is twofold. First, researchers can ask whether behavior that is observed in the lab, such as cooperation in the prisoner's dilemma game, predicts actual behavior out in the world. On this question, there is mounting evidence that a person's behavior in economic games does indeed predict forms of charity and working to help others. 2007, for example, in one study, participants first played the dictator game. They were given €10, and then they chose an amount to give to a stranger under anonymous conditions. Some 4 to 5 weeks later, participants got a letter that was made to seem like it was for another student whom they didn't know. When they opened up the envelope addressed to them, they discovered a letter from a grandmother to another student, Alexander, congratulating him on doing well academically. Inside the envelope were €10 and Alexander's correct address, which gave participants the opportunity to mail the misdirected letter to Alexander. Did the amount the participants shared in the dictator game 4 weeks earlier predict whether or not they would take time out of their day and mail the letter to Alexander? Indeed it did. People who gave more in the dictator game were more likely to return the misdirected letter. A second way to address concerns about the external validity of economic games is with field experiments that seek to replicate findings observed in the lab. Recall that field experiments are studies conducted outside the lab, observing real-world behavior. Here again, the evidence supports the principles of cooperation that have been uncovered with economic games. In one study, the researchers wanted to encourage residents in 15 homeowners associations to agree to a more energy-efficient use of their air conditioners. 2013. They did so by having participants sign up on a sheet posted on a kiosk near the mailboxes for the homes or apartments. In one condition, participants wrote their names on the sheet. In a second condition, they signed up with a numerical code. When people are aware of their own reputations, they're more cooperative in economic games of different kinds. Would this effective reputation replicate in energy-saving but costly cooperation out in the world? Yes. When participants signed up using their names, they were 3 times more likely to sign up for the service than when they did so anonymously. Box 14.6. Focus on positive psychology. Is cooperation contagious? Popular movies and clever advertisements have used the pay it forward concept. When we cooperate, we inspire others to be more cooperative in subsequent situations. Is cooperation contagious? For years, James Fowler and Nicholas Christakis have been gathering evidence on the contagious nature of human behavior and have discovered that smoking, anxiety, happiness, and obesity, for example, spread through communities from one person to another. 2009. We are a mimetic species, prone to imitating the behaviors of others around us. Using an economic game, Fowler and Christakis found that cooperative acts inspire others to be more cooperative in ensuing situations. In the study, participants played several rounds of an economic game in groups of 4. Each round involved an entirely new set of participants. In each round, the participant was given 20 money units, MUs, and allowed to give some amount, between 0 and 20, to the group. Each MU the participant gave to the group was translated to an increase of 0.4 MU for each of the 4 group members. This means that each gift of 1 MU would cost the giver 0.6 MU personally, but benefit each group member. If participants kept all their MUs, they would end the game with 20 MUs. If they each gave all their MUs to the group, each member would end the game with 32 MUs. This method created the usual dilemma that behaviors costly to the self are beneficial for the group, and allowed Fowler and Christakis to examine how cooperative gifts to other players by a player in one round might influence those other players' levels of generosity in subsequent rounds. They found that for every MU a player gave, that players' partners would give 0.19 MU more on average to a new set of players in the next round, and 0.07 MU on average to still other players in the round after that, 2 times removed from the original round. Paying it forward. The popular movie Pay It Forward focuses on the theme of how one person's generosity leads to other acts of generosity. So you can see there's the little boy in the picture, and on the chalkboard behind him, as you can see, one person being generous to 3 people, and then if each of those 3 people are generous to 3 people, that's 9 people, and then if each of those 9 people are generous to 3 people, and it keeps multiplying. Culture and cooperation. Given how labels, and therefore construals, shape levels of cooperation, you might expect cultural factors to have a similar influence on the inclination to either cooperate or defect. To explore this question, Joseph Henrich and his colleagues recruited individuals from 15 small societies around the world to play the ultimatum game, a close relative of the prisoner's dilemma game, 2001. In the original version of the ultimatum game, one player, the allocator, is given a certain amount of money, say $10, and chooses to keep a certain amount of that $10 and allocate the rest to a second participant, the responder. The responder can then choose to either accept or reject the allocator's offer. If the responder accepts the offer, the responder receives what was offered, and the allocator keeps the balance. If the responder rejects the offer, neither player receives anything. The Heinrich team conducted a cross-cultural version of the ultimatum game, recruiting participants who were foragers, slash-and-burn farmers, nomadic herders, and individuals in settled agriculturalist societies in Africa, South America, and Indonesia. What the participants were allowed to offer an anonymous stranger differed. In some cultures it was money, in others a cherished good such as tobacco. In all cases, the researchers attempted to make rewards equal to approximately the same fraction of a daily wage in each culture. The first finding of note was that in the 15 cultures, allocators offered, on average, 39% of the good to anonymous strangers. In other research across Western cultures, 71% of the allocators offered the responder 40 to 50% of the money. Of course, it's important to bear in mind that there are strategic reasons for participants making such generous offers that have nothing to do with altruistic tendencies. Most notably, they probably anticipated that the respondent would reject unfair, trivial offers. Nevertheless, these results suggest that people are more cooperative and willing to share than one might expect. Heinrich and his colleagues then looked closely at the 15 cultures to determine what cultural factors predict the likelihood of cooperative generosity in the ultimatum game. One factor stood out: how much the individuals in a culture depended on one another to survive. The more the members of a culture depended on one another to gather food and meet other needs, the more they offered to a stranger when they were allocators in the ultimatum game. For example, the Mashiguenga people of Peru rarely collaborate with members outside of their family to produce food. Their average allocation in the ultimatum game was 26% of the resource. The La Morala of Indonesia, by contrast, fish in highly collaborative groups of individuals from different families. Cooperation is essential to their livelihood and subsistence. Their average gift in the ultimatum game was 58%. Cooperation in different cultures. A. The Mashiguenga of Peru collaborate little with others outside their family and gave little in the ultimatum game, described in the text. B. The La Morala of Indonesia collaborate extensively in fishing and gave a lot. So the left you can see the Mashiguenga walking along a bridge together, probably in a family unit, and on the right you can see the La Morala of Indonesia. They're all standing together by a fishing boat. This theme, that interdependence fosters cooperation, helps explain other cultural influences on cooperation. Consider, for example, the following findings about cooperation. When people are primed to think about religious concepts, they are more likely to cooperate in the prisoner's dilemma. People from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are more likely to endorse cooperative values, and in countries plagued by civil war, such as Sierra Leone and Uganda, it's those individuals who have witnessed violence who are more likely to cooperate in economic games. One could argue that religion, being poor, and exposure to violence each create social conditions that require that people depend on one another to survive, and that this interdependence prompts greater cooperation. In keeping with this thinking, even the discipline you choose to study in college and the degree of interdependence it encourages influences cooperation. Take, for example, one of the most popular majors at many American campuses, economics. Economic theory assumes that people are rational actors who always act in self-interested ways, attempting to maximize their own gains independent of the concerns of others. Many people may think that this is a cynical view of the human condition, but in keeping with the ideas of 18th century philosopher, 1700s, Adam Smith, economists have assumed that people and society are best served if individuals are allowed to selfishly pursue their own ends. The storekeeper and restaurateur will succeed to the extent that they serve their patrons well, simultaneously improving their customers' lives and doing well themselves by charging as much as a competitive market will allow. Does training in the discipline of economics and its axioms of self-interest and independence encourage people to act more selfishly? The results of several studies indicate that it does. In one study, undergraduates majoring in economics and in a variety of other disciplines participated in a single trial prisoner's dilemma game. 1992. 72% of the economics majors defected on their partners, whereas only 47% of those majoring in other disciplines defected. In a random sample of over 1,000 professors in 23 disciplines, participants were asked how much money they gave annually to public television, the United Way, and other charitable causes. 1993. The economists were twice as likely as all the others to take a free ride on the contributions of their fellow citizens. In other words, giving nothing to charity while presumably enjoying services, such as public television, to the same extent as everyone else. The subculture in which people are immersed appears to powerfully influence their inclination to either cooperate with others or look only after themselves. Every individual endeavors as much as he can to employ his capital in the support of domestic industry, and so to direct that industry that its produce may be of greatest value. every individual necessarily labors to render the annual revenue of the society as great as he can. He neither intends to promote the public interest, nor knows how much he is promoting it, by directing that industry in such a manner as its produce may be of greatest value. He intends only his own gain, and he is in this, as in many other cases, led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, 1776. Evolution and cooperation, tit for tat. In The Evolution of Cooperation, 1984, political scientist Robert Axelrod asked how cooperation might emerge in competitive environments governed by the ruthless pursuit of self-interest. In the context of human evolution, how might non-kin begin to act with an eye toward advancing the welfare of others? Axelrod assumed that cooperation was part of our evolutionary heritage, given its universality and its emergence in even the most unlikely of social contexts. For example, in the trenches of World War I, British and French soldiers were separated from their enemies, the Germans, by a few hundred yards of no man's land. Brutal assaults by one side were typically met with equally fierce counterattacks by the other. And yet even here cooperation frequently emerged, allowing soldiers to eat meals peacefully, to enjoy long periods of non-confrontation, and even to fraternize with one another. The two sides would fly special flags, make verbal agreements, and fire deliberately misguided shots, all to signal and maintain peaceful cooperation between the episodes of attack in which each side was bent on exterminating the other. Axelrod conducted a study that helps illuminate the evolutionary origins of cooperation. Although simple in design, this study yields profound lessons. Axelrod ran a tournament in which players, academics, prize-winning mathematicians, computer hackers, and common folk were invited to submit computer games that specified what choices to make on a round of the prisoner's dilemma game, given what had happened on previous rounds. 1984. In the first tournament, 14 strategies were submitted. Each strategy played 200 rounds of the prisoner's dilemma game with every other strategy. The points were tallied, and the most effective strategy was announced, the winner. It was a so-called tit-for-tat strategy submitted by mathematical psychologist Anatole Rappaport. The tit-for-tat strategy is disarmingly simple. It cooperates on the first round with every opponent, and then reciprocates whatever the opponent did on the previous round. An opponent's cooperation was rewarded with immediate cooperation. Defection was punished with immediate defection. In other words, start out cooperatively and reciprocate your partner's previous move. Axelrod held a second tournament that attracted the submission of 62 strategies. All the entrants knew the results of the first round, that the tit-for-tat strategy had won. In the second tournament, the tit-for-tat strategy again prevailed. Note that the tit-for-tat strategy didn't win every round when pitted against all the different strategies. Instead, it did better overall against the diversity of strategies. What makes the tit-for-tat strategy special, and how might it be relevant to your own life? Axelrod contends that the tit-for-tat strategy is based on a set of valuable principles that apply when forming friendships, dealing with a difficult personality at work, negotiating with bosses, maintaining long-term romantic relationships, and raising children. 5 factors make it an especially compelling strategy. 1. It's cooperative and thus encourages mutually supportive action toward a shared goal. 2. It's not envious. A partner using this strategy can do extremely well without resorting to competitive behavior. 3. It's not exploitable, meaning it's not easily taken advantage of. If you defect on the tit-for-tat, it will defect on you. 4. It's forgiving, that is, it's willing to cooperate at the first cooperative action of the partner, even after long runs of defection and competition. 5. It's easy to read. It shouldn't take long for others to know that the tit-for-tat strategy is being played. Be nice, stalwart, forgiving, and clear. That's a good set of principles to live by. Tit for tat strategy. A strategy in the prisoner's dilemma game in which the player's first move is cooperative. Thereafter, the player mimics the other person's behavior, whether cooperative or competitive. This strategy fares well when used against other strategies. Looking back, cooperation is part of our evolutionary heritage. The prisoner's dilemma game models the many situations in everyday life when defection is the best solution for each person separately, but cooperation benefits the two together. Situational factors, such as the likelihood of repeated interactions and whether your reputation is on the line, influence levels of cooperation and competition. So too, do construal processes. People can be primed to cooperate or defect. Studies of cultures in remote parts of the world reveal that cooperation is a human universal, and that cultures characterized by economic interdependence show greater cooperation. The tit-for-tat strategy involves initial cooperation and then reciprocation of an adversary's behavior, encouraging mutual cooperation. Chapter Review Summary. Altruism. People may help others out of selfish motives, including reducing personal distress and gaining social rewards, such as praise, attention, or gratitude. A form of pure, undiluted altruism is based on empathic concern, the feeling of concern for another person after observing and being moved by that person's needs. Empathic concern motivates people to volunteer or otherwise enhance the welfare of others. Altruistic behavior is influenced by features of the situation, such as who is present and what sort of need or suffering is observed. Bystander intervention depends on the number of people observing the person needing help. The presence of others can lead to diffusion of responsibility, in which nobody takes responsibility for helping the person in need, especially not quickly. When people are unsure about an emergency situation, they might do nothing for fear of embarrassment in case nothing is really wrong. Victim characteristics that increase the likelihood of being helped include whether the person is similar to potential helpers and whether the victim makes the distress known. People who live in rural settings are more likely to help others than people living in urban settings. People from lower-class backgrounds are more empathic than people from upper-class backgrounds and are more likely to give resources to strangers and help people in need. Exposure to religious concepts increases levels of altruism, perhaps through the effects of feeling watched. From the standpoint of evolution, people's actions should serve to increase the likelihood of survival and reproduction. According to the kin selection hypothesis, people will help others to preserve the genes of close kin. In reciprocal altruism, people help others or grant favors in the belief that such behavior will be reciprocated in the future. So, reciprocal altruism is like exchange relationships. Cooperation. Cooperation is part of human evolutionary heritage, and it is evident in almost all societies. The prisoner's dilemma game, used to study cooperation, tempts participants to maximize their own outcomes at the expense of another person by defecting. This strategy backfires if the other person also defects. The optimal outcome is for both to settle for something less than the maximum by cooperating. Interacting with people repeatedly over time increases cooperation. People look for nonverbal cues that someone will cooperate. If they detect such cues, they will cooperate in turn. Knowing a person's reputation as cooperative or competitive influences levels of cooperation in profound ways. Gossip is a means of spreading information to other group members about an individual's reputation, and it can increase cooperation in groups. Cooperation is widespread in certain cultures, particularly where members are dependent on one another. The tit-for-tat strategy in the prisoner's dilemma game is a reciprocal strategy that is cooperative, non-envious, non-exploitable, forgiving, and easy to read. It helps maximize outcomes in potentially competitive situations that occur in real life.